But we begin with the escalating tensions in the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stopped by the United Nations today to warn of a Russian invasion in the coming days.
Russia plans to manufacture a pretext for its attack. We don't know exactly the form it will take. In the past few days, Russian media has already begun to spread some of these false alarms and claims to maximize public outrage, to lay the groundwork for an invented justification for war. I am here today not to start a war, but to prevent one. The information I presented here is validated by what we've seen unfolding in plain sight before our eyes for months.
Despite U.S. intelligence pointing to a potential attack, Russia says it is pulling back troops from Ukraine's borders. They also contend troops engaged in military exercises in Belarus will return to their bases once the drills are over. But the U.S. is skeptical. The Pentagon says Russia has actually added another 7,000 soldiers.
Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris is on her way to Germany to attend the Munich Security Conference. While there, she will meet with Ukrainian President Zelensky about the unfolding crisis.
This comes as the U.S. and its allies warn Russia will create a pretext to attack Ukraine.
And Ukraine's military is accusing Russian-backed forces of a big provocation after shells were fired in a village hitting a kindergartner today. CBS News' Skyler Henry has more.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken made a stop at the United Nations as the crisis on Ukraine's border with Russia intensifies.
Russia plans to manufacture a pretext for its attack. It could be a fabricated so-called terrorist bombing inside Russia, the invented discovery of a mass grave, a staged drone strike against civilians, or a fake, even a real, attack using chemical weapons.
At a press conference earlier in Brussels, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Russia had added about 7,000 troops along Ukraine's border over the past few days, contradicting Russian claims of a pullback.
I was a soldier myself not that long ago, and I know firsthand that you don't do these sort of things for no reason.
New satellite images appear to show current Russian military activity in the region, including the construction of field hospitals. In eastern Ukraine, officials accuse Russian-backed forces of shelling a village, damaging this kindergarten.
In a sign of escalating tensions, Russia has expelled the second most senior U.S. diplomat in Moscow from the country. The State Department now says the U.S. is considering its response.
Every indication we have is they're prepared to go into Ukraine, attack Ukraine.
Earlier this week, the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv shut down and moved to western Ukraine.
The situation could worsen very quickly, and we're very worried about that and are urging all Americans to leave the country now.
CBS News has learned city workers there have been encouraged to take up firearms and medical training and stockpile about 3 months' worth of medical supplies in the event of a Russian invasion. Skyler Henry, CBS News, the White House.
And joining us now from Ukraine is CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Hi, Charlie. So President Biden is saying there is still a diplomatic path forward, but we know Russia has not yet responded to that written response the U.S. sent Moscow. They keep saying that a response is on the way, and so far nothing. So what sort of diplomatic solution could turn the tide here?
Yes, well, the Russians say that they have responded. The United States hasn't responded to the response, as it were. There's always room for diplomacy. That's what President Biden is talking about in any conflict. You know, before the first shots are fired or the first bombs start falling out of the sky. And to that point, the Secretary of State, during that UN Security Council briefing earlier this afternoon, reached out to the Kremlin, to Dmitry Peskov, who's essentially the right-hand man of President Putin, saying that we want to have talks. There's an opportunity now in the next few days when we have Vice President Kamala Harris and the Secretary of State going to these Munich talks. We'll have the president from here, Vladimir Zelensky, involved in essentially what are talks between European partners. But it is, again, an opportunity for the Russians to reach out and find some sort of diplomatic end to the crisis that's going on now. Now, in terms of what President Putin is looking for, he has made his demands pretty clear, and they're not going to be met by the United States or NATO. In terms of, pulling back the presence of NATO forces in places like Poland, Romania, Warsaw Pact countries, that's not going to happen. The recognition of the Donbass region, which has become contentious once again today and has been for the past 8 years, that's not going to happen either, or the withdrawal of some of the weaponry to NATO partners. So that's where the stalemate is now. And as was mentioned in that report earlier, the expulsion of the deputy ambassador from Moscow just shows you that this, if anything, the diplomatic opportunities are running out.
Charlie just mentioned the Donbass region. Give us some insight into the incident earlier today where a kindergartner was hit by artillery fire there in the region of Ukraine.
Yes, well, this fighting has been going on since 2014. Although it was supposed to come to an end in 2015, there was the Minsk agreement that would have brought a ceasefire, something that was negotiated and agreed upon. Something like 15,000 people have died since that agreement was put in place. So this is an ongoing low-level conflict that has continued. However, what's important here is in the last 24 hours, the Ukrainian military said they saw something like 29 breaches of that ceasefire. Now, this is a two-way street. The Russian separatists, Russian-backed separatists, we need to make that clear. This isn't the Russian military attacking Ukraine. That's completely different. These are Russian-backed separatists who launched an attack and hit that kindergarten. You may have seen pictures of that. A couple people suffered from concussions. The Russian separatists say, well, that was just retaliation because they were fired on by Ukrainian forces. But what's concerning here is, first of all, it's an escalation in that kind of violence. And anything now could serve as a pretext and a flashpoint to a larger conflict. And this is exactly the kind of thing that the Pentagon has been warning about, the Secretary of State warned about earlier at the UN Security Council, where Russia can point the finger at Ukrainian forces, say, you have been the aggressors here. They've already mentioned the concept of ethnic cleansing in those areas, in that Donbass region. That's setting the stage for really anything to justify a larger military intervention backed by the Russians into that region, first of all. And then, of course, what we were discussing earlier about the Russian involvement in Belarus. That is a huge concern. Those exercises are supposed to stop within the next few days. The date they were using was around February 20th, but now they're wiggling back a little bit. First of all, saying, well, we're not sure they'll end when they end. And the Belarusian government are saying, okay, they may be pulling back some of their forces, but they may leave some of that military hardware there. That is not a pullback.
Not a pullback indeed. Charlie D'Agata in Ukraine for us. Thank you very much.